Let's talk about saltwater swimming pools or electronic chlorine generators for your swimming pool. And maybe just like this should be like part of your due diligence. This video is for somebody who wants to know more about it. You're thinking of converting your pool over to salt water, and you've heard some good stuff, you've heard some bad stuff. You're not really sure of your opinion yet because you're just trying to absorb information. This video is for you. So, first of all, I have a ton of resources about this subject already. This is something that I've talked about extensively at swimmingpoolsteve.com and in my pool blogs. And if I'm doing my job properly, there'll be some links down there to articles like getting informed about saltwater pools. So if you wanted to find it quickly, you need to Google it. Google swimming pool Steve, get informed about saltwater pools. And that's like a good entry article into about a dozen that I have all linking to each other that I've written about the subject, kind of approaching it from different angles because everybody's situation is unique. There's specific information that you might want to talk about, like galvanic corrosion and what to do about it, or other, comparing different systems. I've got all these articles there as a teaching aid to help swimming pool owners kind of assess salt chlorine pools for themselves. But I never really approached this from the video perspective. It's not something that I talked about long form. And so I'm just going to approach this like we're in your backyard. I'm a pool guy. You're a pool owner. And we're just going to talk about salt water because you heard your neighbor Bob got salt water. He loves it. His pool always looks great, super easy. He hardly does anything to take care of it. You want a saltwater pool. You've heard some stuff. You've heard maybe like, I don't know, okay, what makes like stuff rust, right? And that's not untrue. But I just want to kind of like maybe just arm you with information, because if anything, there is a problem that exists with saltwater pools, it's that there's so much misinformation out there. This is old technology, 30-40-year-old technology, and for the majority of that time, so many decades, it was kind of misrepresented from a sales perspective as this like takes care of your pool for you, right? And so you buy it, many people buy it expecting some sort of maintenance-free pool. Many people buy it expecting some sort of alternative to chlorine versus a chlorine generation system, which more accurately describes what you're buying. And so this is just expectations of function not met, resulting in an unhappy pool owner. You pay a lot of money for this thing, being told or expecting it does something in particular. It doesn't really do what you expect it to do. It really only does one thing and one thing only. And so this is good to clear the air on this. A salt chlorine generator will generate your day-to-day, chlorine demand. And this is once you've got it all dialed in and, you've kind of got it on autopilot, not the dialing in phase where you kind of have to play with it a little bit to figure out the right settings for your pool. But once you've got all that figured out, it's going to provide the amount of chlorine that you use in your pool on a day-to-day basis, pretty much. Does it eliminate having to add chlorine externally? It does not, for two reasons. One, it generates chlorine slowly over a long period of time. What if you test the water and you're like, oh, I need like chlorine now, immediately. There's no chlorine. I got to get some chlorine in here right away. Some people would go to the salt chlorine generator and just crank it or hit the super chlorinate button. And it still just generates slowly over a long period of time. It just normally has this digital on and off cycle that it uses, and all it'll do is just extend that digital on and off cycle. It will generate more chlorine over a period of time. But if you have a salt chlorine system, you should absolutely still grab some liquid chlorine and pour it on in the pool when your pool needs some chlorine. It's really not... Like, you can do it. You can set it to super chlorinate or 100% output, and you can make a bunch of extra chlorine if you were low, but then like you kind of way overshoot and you got to dial it back and like, whoa, like it's just easier and it's more cost effective for you to just have external chlorine, which you manually add. And further to that, you are going to need it anyway. A salt chlorine system does not alleviate the need to do breakpoint chlorination, where you increase the free chlorine level to be 10 times the combined chlorine level and hold it there over an extended period of time. with a salt chlorine system, you could do it. You can do anything with that dial and output. It will do what you want in terms of making how much you tell it to make. It won't just stop making it. Like, it's not a smart system like that that will recognize, oh, we're at too many parts per million here. It's like, if it's set at 10, it's just going to keep cranking it out. That's what it does. But it's not to your advantage. Every salt chlorine cell, due to the precious metals that it's made from, has a finite amount, a calculated amount of chlorine, which it will be able to generate over its lifetime, and then it's kaput. And I have another link on my website about that subject, where I look at every different popular salt chlorine system, and then I'll say how much the salt cell is rated to make in pounds of chlorine over its life. And it really makes for a nice apples to apples comparison for different salt chlorine systems. But that's how it works, right? There's a finite amount that this chlorine cell is going to be able to make. And if you're using that for your superchlorinate and breakpoint chlorination and things like that, you're going to go through your cell a lot faster. If you buy a couple jugs of liquid chlorine, or you use granular, whatever form of external chlorine is normal to you, you can use that and then just use the salt chlorine system for that day-to-day maintenance dose of chlorine. That's really all this system does. It's all it's ever been designed to do. And anything over and above that you've been told it does, it doesn't do. And so it's not a maintenance-free system. It's not anything approaching that. It's a chlorine regeneration system. That's it. You're going to buy the electrolysis cell. You're going to dump, a few thousand parts per million of pure salt into your pool. Bada bang, you now have this brine tank where you're going to generate your own chlorine through electrolysis. And there is a price to pay for that. So there's a chemical process. Like, look, I'm not a chemist, right? I'm just a lowly pool guy, but I understand this stuff to a certain extent. And what I can tell you is that the different types of chlorine that you use in your pool, a chlorine puck, liquid chlorine, like all these different things have a different pH. The process of generating chlorine through electrolysis results in a momentary high pH. And so this high pH in that localized area bleeds out into your pool system, diffuses into the water, and gives you the very common situation where your pH creeps upwards all the time. It kind of depends on how much chlorine demand your system has and how much chlorine your system's making as to how high your pH is going to be. This is not a universal problem that exists with every single salt chlorine pool, but an awful lot of them have a problem with high pH. And there's a whole conversation to be had there about having a pool with high pH. It's already got a high TDS level, because whatever the TDS, total dissolved solids in the water, was, we went ahead and added another 3,000 parts per million of salt on top of that. So TDS is very high in this pool. And then you've got the high pH. I mean, for the saturation index balancing of this pool, which is the measurement scale which we use to determine the likelihood of this water to be in a neutral state, an acidic state, or a scaling state. When you get things like high TDS and high pH, you end up very likely to be towards this scaling end of this. And that's not something that you want. It's not a problem overnight, but this is the kind of thing that over the long term can develop long-term problems, which result in things like reduced service life to your salt chlorine cell. It develops a lot of scale on the salt chlorine cell itself, and your pool itself can develop problems with scaling. And it's very common, if you're going to use a salt chlorine system, that it would probably be a good idea to use a stain and scale preventer chemical. Just that's part of your regular pool maintenance. Now, see, nobody told you that either. Now all of a sudden we're having to buy and use extra chemicals as a result of this chlorine salt system that's supposed to just be taking care of the pool for you. It's not. You're still buying chlorine, and further, now we're buying a product that we probably weren't buying and probably weren't using if you just had a traditional chlorine maintenance schedule for this pool versus the salt chlorine system that you bought and installed. So again, if you were installing this being told, oh, this is going to save me money and it's going to save me work, and the first two things I said is it's not going to do that and it's going to cost extra, and it's like, well, then you wouldn't be very happy if you bought one. It's all about your priorities. What are your priorities? And let me give you a great example for this here. So I've done an awful lot of swimming pool contracting. I've met an awful lot of people in my time. And this is true for houses. This is true for cars. Some people really take care of their stuff. It's important to them that, they keep it clean. There's no scratches. There's no dirt. They, dry it off before they put it away. No matter what we're talking about here, like a car is a good example. Some people with car maintenance, it's like I bought my car 8 years ago. I've never done a thing to it. There's those people. And then there's the people who wash and wax it every weekend, and they change the oil, twice as often as they're supposed to and stuff like that. These are just different people with different approaches to life. So those two people are going to appreciate a salt chlorine system differently, right? And so here's one of the big problems I worry about. Are you a type of person who is very, very particular with, like, maybe you bought a very expensive pool deck? I remember dealing with one client who had imported Italian bluestone slate, and it was very expensive and absolutely gorgeous. And she was very, very particular about that pool deck. And so I would say to somebody like her, I'm not sure that a salt chlorine system might be for you, because what if you experience some staining on the pool deck? All that splash out that you get out of the pool, kids running around and doing cannonballs and whatever. When that dries, there's a lot of salt in that water, right? And what happens when salt water dries out? You're going to get like crystal formation, right? That's exactly what happens. And further to that, there's two things happening here. One, visually, you can see that, right? I think we all know what salt stains look like from dried up salt water. Doesn't look good, right? And if you spent a ton of money on your pool deck, like an absolute ton of money, well, you might not want to get a salt chlorine system, because you're for sure going to be having a lot of staining here. And it's one thing to have the staining, maybe we could wash it off, but here's what I'm more worried about. That salt water seeps into the surface, right? And as it does, it's carrying that salt crystal with it. It gets down into the little pockets and pores of this stone, and then it's going to, evaporate, go away, do its thing, be absorbed by the stone. But it leaves behind that little crystal growth, like you see it on the surface when salt water dries. But on the very small level, like, these little pores might not be large enough to contain these crystals. Just like water forming into ice, this crystal growth has expansive forces, and it can cause physical damage. And wouldn't that be bad to have this beautiful pool deck just be ruined entirely because you've got this salt permeating the deck and, causing some sort of problem with the crystal growth? I've seen those things happen, and whether it's just a cosmetic stain or a risk for potential long-term damage, if you're just a person who's like, this is important to me, and I do not like stains, I do not want problems, I don't want that to crack, I don't want this, I don't want that, salt chlorine might not be for you. If you're a person who is like, it's a pool deck, it's going to get water on it, of course it's going to have stains, it's fine, like, I don't care about that, it's just concrete, or it's just paving stones or whatever, I just don't want to have to keep going to the store and buying jugs of chlorine. Yes, I understand I still need to buy some jugs of chlorine, but wouldn't I need to buy way, way less of those if I had a salt chlorine generator? Absolutely. 9 out of 10 jugs you don't need anymore, because it's the salt chlorine system's taking care of the day-to-day maintenance dosing for you. But instead of all of that chlorine that you were buying, maybe now you're going to be buying twice as much acid, or what if you had to buy 4 times as much muriatic acid to battle the constantly high rising pH of your pool with this new salt chlorine generator? Would you still get it then? The acid's not very expensive really at all. Like, I mean, the chlorine's not either, but like, it's all relative to your personal experience and what you're hoping to get out of the system. And really, really, at the end of the day, it's just going to make your day-to-day chlorine for you. It's not a free lunch. You're probably going to get some more staining. There is some small risk for damage. We haven't touched on galvanic corrosion. Might as well talk about it now. Galvanic corrosion is probably the number one thing that I've written about on this subject in particular. An electromechanical process which is destructive to the anode metal. Whenever you have a saltwater solution, like a primary battery, a saltwater solution with dissimilar metals submerged into the saltwater solution, measured across the poles, you will have a potential difference. Another word for potential difference is voltage. So this is what a primary battery is. And if you think about it, your pool's a lot like a 30,000 gallon primary battery. And so when you go and add another 3,000 parts per million of salt to this giant body of water with all of these dissimilar metals that are part of the system, It's now connected because the water itself, interestingly, water is not conductive to electricity, but the impurities within water are. And as the number of impurities increases, so does the electrical conductivity. And so we add 3,000 parts per million of salt to the water, we increase the electrical conductivity, and we now start to create what's called a galvanic couple between dissimilar metals. Two dissimilar metals will find each other electrically via the salt water. One of them will be an anode and one of them will be a cathode. The more noble metal will be the cathode. The least noble metal will be the anode. The anode experiences a very increased rate of corrosion decay. The cathode, interestingly, receives what's called cathodic protection, which it means an enhanced resistance to corrosion. So it's very interesting. If you didn't do anything and you just add a bunch of salt to a salt chlorine pool and you didn't take any other steps or make any other provisions to account for all of this stuff that I just explained, what you would experience is a faster rate of decay of anything metal that's connected to, in, or around your swimming pool. Yours would fail or decay faster than the pool right next door, which is exactly the same, but does not have 3,000 parts per million of salt in the water. The chlorine's kind of irrelevant in the equation. It's really just by creating the galvanic couple between dissimilar metals, we create this destructive force where an anode is chosen and it's destroyed. And instead of allowing something miscellaneous in your swimming pool to become the anode, because there's so many things made of metal in all different kinds of pools, pick your poison. Which is the one that you want to become the anode and just be destroyed, corrode aggressively? Well, instead of just allowing that to happen by chance, why don't you install a sacrificial anode? It's kind of the perfect thing. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't just resolve this problem entirely, but it does over in the pool equipment area, especially the heater. The heater is particularly prone to damage from galvanic corrosion. And so that's why a pool with salt chlorine would probably have a heater failure earlier than a pool without salt chlorine, given exactly similar, water chemistry situations over their entire lives, which is impractical and improbable and would never happen. But just hypothetically, so this has happened, the salt chlorine pool probably fails earlier than the other one. It's just what it is. To my point, in writing about this stuff, I think I have failed to impress upon people that when you install a sacrificial anode, it's not like it solves the problem, right? And so I see people really harp on this. So I got this, so I'm good. And that's good. I want you to get a sacrificial anode installed in your system if you have a salt chlorine generator, but it's not a silver bullet. It only kind of provides localized protection and to a minimum degree. Basically, what I'm saying is that it's the least you can do. More so, I'm not saying don't get the salt chlorine system, because that's the thing that people misinterpret a lot. Oh, don't listen to this guy. He hates salt chlorine. Don't get a salt chlorine system, right? No, I'm not saying that at all. Just be aware of what it is, what it does, what you're likely to experience. And here's the reality. You might very well have a heater that doesn't last as long as your neighbor Bob, who doesn't have a salt pool. You might have a higher pH in your pool on a regular basis and thereby deal with scaling issues where he doesn't. You probably have to buy more, acid or pH down product to lower the pH in your pool, or maybe you need to explore borates to help, kind of deal with that problem. But these are all things that come up as a result, but it's not a reason to not get it. That's not what I'm saying here. Just be aware. That's just kind of who I am, right? I'm an informed person. I'm an informed shopper. This is my specialty. Hey, go into this with your eyes open. And here's some real information. Like, I'm not selling you anything. I don't sell salt chlorine systems to people anywhere. I don't install systems. I'm retired from all that work. So I really don't have a dog in the race here, except to say that I've done this. I've been doing this since these systems were introduced to the swimming pool market. And since then, I've seen just wholesale, like borderline dishonest information. Like if a salesperson says to you the pool's maintenance free, like just turn around and walk out, because they just don't know what they're talking about, or they're just selling you a line, and neither one of those things are good. I don't want to do business with that person. So get a salt chlorine system if you want convenience of not having to add day-to-day chlorine to the pool. And for the most part, it's going to take care of that for you. You understand that you're still going to have to add some external chlorine, but you are still going to be buying a lot less chlorine, that's for sure. You understand that likely you're going to have a problem with your pH drifting high, and there are ramifications of that, and that is that you could end up in the scaling state of the saturation index, and that you might need to buy a stain and scale preventer product for a marginal price and then run that regularly in your swimming pool. There's more. I don't know how many more there are. I think that you've got a pretty good idea now that these systems are good. They are convenient. Would I have one in my pool? I would have one in my pool. I would install one in my mother's pool. We're not particularly, the type of people where my Italian bluestone tile deck is going to have some water stains on it. That doesn't bother me. If it means I don't have to buy chlorine all the time, great. And we haven't even talked about the actual reasons that so many pool owners buy a salt chlorine system. It feels different. If somebody didn't tell you and they're like, go swimming in my pool and guess if it's salt or not, you pretty much for sure would be able to tell because you can feel it. The water doesn't feel as dry. When I get out of a chlorinated pool, just a traditional chlorine pool, I definitely have that like really dry, right away kind of skin and hair. And with a salt system, it's really the opposite. Like you come out feeling like, all oiled up and stuff. Not really, but like it is smoother. It is a silkier feeling, and people definitely notice and talk about that as being one of the benefits. I've definitely heard people talking about people who deal with skin irritation and rash and eczema. Some of these people say and have reported that using salt chlorine pools helps them. Some people say that the addition of manual chlorine creates this peak and valley effect, right? So your chlorine goes really low and then you add a bunch. Now it's really high again. And over a few days, it goes low and high and low and high. And some people are really sensitive to changes in water chemistry. And I think that the majority is people who are like really light haired and very fair skin. These people tend to react quicker than other people to minute changes to the pH balance of the water, or chlorine, which is a little bit too high, or chloramines, the presence of chloramines in the water, which there should be 0.00 parts per million chloramines in your pool, but that's not usually the case. Like if you go down to the local YMCA, their pool smells like crazy of chlorine, and it's actually those are chloramines that you're smelling. So those chloramines, they give you red eyes, they can give you itchy skin. So some people are just really reactive to that. A salt system, because of the nature of the way that it generates this low and slow stream of chlorine for your pool, you don't really have that peaks and valleys thing going on anymore. You do have that dial-in phase that I mentioned back in the beginning of this video where you're figuring out, really what setting you need to be at for your pool. And then once you achieve that, you really do get kind of like a baseline amount of chlorine. Like you pick your amount, 3 parts per million chlorine. That's what I like in my pool. I set my output on 5 and I maintain 3 parts per million pretty much. And then periodically, when you can measure your combined chlorine is above 0 parts per million, you would perform breakpoint chlorination by pouring in some external chlorine, but you don't change that baseline setting. You leave your salt chlorine system set at 5, and you just use external chlorine for the breakpoint chlorination. Let it come down because you'll have found 5 as this stasis level. If you have it at 6, you eventually have too much chlorine. If you have it at 4, eventually you see that it's at 0. So, that this is pretty much most pools operate that way. It's just about getting there initially. I don't have a problem with salt chlorine systems. I just do have a problem with people buying them and not being aware of them. And I want you to be aware that there are some drawbacks. It's not enough to make you say, like, wholesale, I won't buy them. But, like, it's dependent on the situation. When you're dealing with a pool deck that costs $200,000, I'm not so sure about this salt chlorine system. Or you have a very special, natural stone pool coping that you bought and it's a really dark color. It's like, those obviously not obviously, but often that is a bad combination. Like a dark colored stone with a salt chlorine pool is kind of like a worst case scenario for this salt staining. And that's just the cosmetic thing. We talked before about how it can end up being, more damaging than just on the surface level. We talked about galvanic corrosion and how adding salt to your pool increases the electrical conductivity. Your pool is essentially a primary battery, and so we can give it an anode in order to like sacrifice that instead of something more expensive like your pool heater. but systemically within your pool, you're still getting this electromechanical destructive force happening, and there will be localized anodes and localized cathodes happening, electrically speaking, and probably you'll see advanced rates of corrosion in that pool versus a pool which is exactly the same in every regard, but simply didn't have the salt chlorine system. So it's a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. Like there's some convenience to it, but there's no free lunch. It's kind of the way that I put it. And as long as your expectation is that it just makes your day-to-day chlorine and nothing more, no expectation of automation of your pool system. It's not really chemical automation in any way, except for technically it is a chemical sanitizer feed. You know, you turn it on, it generates your chemical sanitizer, but it does nothing to control the pH except essentially contribute to the problem. Maybe just one last thing to touch on there. I blew through it, but I mentioned borates. If you have a problem with high pH in your salt chlorine pool, which is a problem for a lot of you who have these systems, you can ignore it and deal with the ramifications of scaling and things like that, or you could constantly be adjusting your pH down with acid, and it just like you'd be right back to where you were the next day, and you're just like, how does this even work? I feel like I'm chasing my tail. There's one of the things that you can explore doing, that you should explore doing, is borates. Borates at 30 to 50 parts per million in a swimming pool do a couple of different things. One, they directly result in you using and needing less chlorine. So that setting of 5 that we used to be at for that salt chlorine, we just cranked it down to 4. Now that's all you need to maintain that day to day. But that's not even the primary reason. The primary reason you want this is it's a buffer for pH and alkalinity movement. So alkalinity in and of itself, the total alkalinity is the buffer for pH movement. The alkalinity being where we put it, 80 to 120 parts per million, provides the buffer that prevents the pH from just swinging wildly. This is kind of how the system works. Adding borates adds basically another level to this whole thing, this whole buffer system. And so you set all of your levels, you get your pool all balanced up perfectly, just the way you like it. And then you apply your borates at 30 to 50 parts per million, and it essentially locks in your pH and locks in your alkalinity. And you're going to notice a lot less movement in those numbers than you had before. And you will be using and consuming less chlorine than you were before. Very interesting stuff. I do read that dogs should not drink a lot of borates in pool water. So if I had a dog or many dogs and they swam and drank the pool water like crazy, maybe borates might not be for you. I'm not a veterinarian. You have to look this up for yourself, but it's something I read and wanted to make you aware of it, since I'm suggesting borates to begin with. But it is something that I'm seeing more and more people within the pool industry going towards, especially the people who do like pool maintenance, and they sell a service where you pay them X dollars a month and they just take care of the pool, and that includes the chemicals, because now they have this vested interest in using the least amount of chemicals in your pool, because then it costs them the least amount of money. Those are the people who are using borates the most, because otherwise they're just eating the chemical cost. And they've realized by using this, they can marginally reduce the amount that they're spending on their chlorine, and they can be doing less pH adjustments, less total alkalinity adjustments. A lot of dividends to be paid here. So something to consider, because it does remove a lot of the potential disadvantages that you might be having to consider with a salt chlorine system. Well, I hope that you found this information helpful. It's like not a standalone video, but hopefully you'll check out those resources that I put down in the comment section, leading to different articles that I've written on this subject. I've written an awful lot of them. This is something that I know a lot about. I've spent a lot of time researching it, discussing it with other professionals, and just seeing real world examples of what happens when you use these systems. I don't dislike them. I just warn against buying something that, you're getting something different than what you think you're getting. If you found this information helpful, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can check out my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com.